Oh, good evening and welcome to Wrokdown. I'm Wendy Stapleton. Our next guest was once known as Australian music industry's favourite son. He's now recognised as one of our founding fathers. And he was there when the first records were being made here. And he knows more about the history, the growth, and the making of Australian music than most people would ever know. Would you please welcome Mr. Ron Tudor, MBE, which means good things, doesn't it?
Lovely.
MBE.
Thank you.
Ronnie, thank you so much for coming in this evening, and I
My
can't tell
pleasure.
you, this is a coup because this man's very hard to catch, aren't you?
I didn't think so,
Oh,
but I do hide away a bit, except from you.
except from me.
Yeah,
Thank you
right.
so much for coming
Right.
in. Look, we just had to have people like yourself. We've been talking to Bill Armstrong. We're going to be talking to Ernie Rose.
Well, you're talking about legends in the industry,
Well, exactly.
those people.
The thing is that you were the founding fathers of our music industry in Australia, as we know it, of the rock industry.
Right.
So, starting at the beginning, as we always do, were you born in Melbourne?
I was born in Tura in Gippsland,
Mm-hmm.
and I went to school in Welshpool. My mother and father were dairy farmers, share farmers, and they had 10 children. My mother was a little bit deaf. I couldn't. that must be one of the reasons why we had 10 children, I think.
Why?
But I don't think she could hear what was being said to her.
Oh, she didn't take the hint.
No.
So were they musical, your parents?
No, not really, but we had big dairy farms where we were milking a lot of cows, like 120 cows, and I had 4 sisters, and they were always singing songs while we were milking by hand, long before machines came in. And we were musical in that sense, and we used to listen to the radio, particularly the 3DB hit parade on a Sunday evening.
So at what age did you come down to the Big Smoke?
Well, it was after the war, actually. I had 2 or 3 years in the armed forces, and when I came back from the war, ex-servicemen were given a bit of priority to get a job. And I took a job on the City West Telephone Exchange as a switchboard operator, long before the city became automatic operation. And you just plug it and say, number please, and you dial a number please, and there was about 150 people in this great big long room just saying number please and dial number
Dial
please.
it through.
And that started to drive me a bit ratty, and I asked for a change, and there was a shift came available at the Cheltenham Telephone Exchange, which was and from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I took that shift, and the only radio station that was on the air in that time was 3AK, when they were in Burke Street.
At the top of Burke Street?
Yeah, right. And they used to come on air at 11 at night and go off at 7 in the morning.
So was that the only time that they transmitted?
Yes, it was, yeah.
During the day at all?
No, because someone else had that same frequency for daytime stuff.
Ah, okay.
So and I used to listen to them to keep myself awake in the telephone exchange, because after about 2 in the morning, the telephone exchange would get very quiet.
Quiet.
So I'm listening, got the radio going, and they're playing a Tommy Dorsey track one evening, and it was the wrong version of the song, and I recognised it straight away. So I phoned them up, and I said, "Oh, you guys are playing the wrong version of that." And they said, "Well, who are you, smarty? And what do you know about it?" So I had a talk with them, and along the way, my brothers and I had a huge collection of jazz records, like all the old 78s. We had like 4,000 or 5,000 of these things, and we were bringing them in from all over the place. So we actually knew a bit about what was on those jazz records, and the upshot of it was, when I spoke to the people at the radio station, they said, "Well, would you like to do a program yourself?" So I said, well, I don't know about that, but I did one.
That sounds too good to be true, doesn't it?
Yeah, it
Just
does,
ringing
yeah,
up in the middle of the night.
I know, and getting invited to do that.
Yeah.
And I used to script the program and give them the records, and they'd do the show.
And so you'd get someone else to actually be the
Right,
the host.
exactly, yeah. And there was a fellow named Doug Entwistle who was the program director. No, he was one of the on-air personnel at 3AK at that time, and I became quite friendly with him, and he phoned me. He then went to 3DB as program director, and I was still working at the Cheltenham Telephone Exchange, and he phoned me one day and said, this is late in 1955, he said, there's a new record company starting up and they want a salesperson. I said, Doug, I haven't sold anything in my life. He said, well, you're going to apply for the job because I've put you up for it now. So I said, okay, so I applied for it and I got the job.
Wrokdown.
So for sales for record companies, was that actually physically going out to the stores
stores,
and,
yeah.
and,
So
and getting,
there's-
say, was there Brash's
Yeah,
and
the
Allen's?
Brash's and Allen's and all those stores and Coles and Myer and David Jones. You go in with your records and you say, well, how many of these do you want? And they look at it and say, oh, no, I don't like that.
So what label was that?
That was W&G.
And that was actually two families in Melbourne,
Yes,
was it? Is that correct?
The White and Gillespie families.
That's right.
Yeah, lovely people. The best people I've ever worked for. They were great. And after about 6 months of this selling, I mean, I remember on the very first day, my first call was going to be Brash's in Elizabeth Street. And I thought, I walked up and past the place about 10 times, trying to get enough
Courage.
to go in. And I went in after a while and I got to know the people quite well. But I think after about 6 months, they called me in, the W&G people called me in and said, are you happy with sales? I said, no, I'm not. And they said, well, we're going to create a position for you where you can be the artist and repertoire promotion and publicity boss of the company.
And also basically A&R, as they call it these days,
right.
is also responsible for sourcing talent. Is that correct?
Of course, yes.
And you have discovered some of our biggest names in Australia.
Well, we got a bit of help. We had some help. I mean, Stan Rofe was very helpful initially. He first brought Johnny Chester to me, and Chester looked as though he's about 12 years old. And Rofe brings his kid into my office and said, this is Johnny Chester, I think you should sign him to a record deal. I said, he's only a kid, he should still be at school. And but Rofe was hosting the Chester concerts at the Preston Town Hall.
Oh, okay.
The rock and roll concerts.
So how old was he?
Oh, he was about 16 then.
It's really old.
yeah. So we started with Chester and then we moved on. We got hold of Colin Cook and Merv Benton and Ernie Sigley and Dinah Trask and the Seekers and...
Normie? No? Did Norm?
No.
Normie wasn't with you?
No, he was a good mate. I wish we had him. So we developed this thing, and the White and Gillespie family were very good to me. They gave me a totally free hand.
So moving on from W&G, there was a radio ban, is that correct?
Yes, there was, yeah.
Here, now, if I've got the idea right, record companies wanted radio to pay
Exactly.
every time they played your
It became known as a pay for play.
pay for play.
Yeah.
And I have often thought that was a sort of weird thing to sort of want, because in actual fact people wouldn't know that you had a record out unless
it was
radio played it.
Right, that was the way that we always worked.
So were these overseas record companies that were asking for this pay to play?
Well, from what I understand of the whole thing, in the first place, it developed from the record companies in the UK, where
Hence that's why Radio Caroline and everything started.
Yeah. And because they primarily had to deal with the BBC. And the BBC didn't hesitate. They just paid money and said, okay, how much do you want? And then the record companies in London thought, hey, this is pretty good. This is pretty easy money. So why don't we try this somewhere else? So they tried it in Australia, and there's a chronological situation to this thing that I'll briefly explain, was that unknown to me at the time, there was an agreement in existence between the Australian Record Industry Association and the Federation of Australian Radio Broadcasters that allowed the broadcasters to broadcast whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And that contract could only be cancelled with 6 months' notice by either party to the other. So in November of 1969, the record industry served notice on the broadcasting station to say that as of May next year, we are withdrawing the rights to play all of the records that we have copyright control over. And that was happening in May of 1970. Now, I was ready to release the first Fable product, to launch the label, in April.
So this is, you'd already...
I've already recorded all this stuff.
All this stuff at Fable?
Yeah, and we recorded all this stuff in either 100 Albert Road or at 180 Bank Street. I forget where it was all done. But the upshot of it was that in the middle of March, I got a phone call from the head of EMI Records in Australia, who explained to me, he said, this is what we're doing and we'd like you to join with us. And this bloke was a fellow named Cess. So I said to him, look, Cess, I've just spent 3 months and a whole heap of money telling all of these people like Matt Flinders, Liv Mason, Hans Paulson, The Strangers, Frankie Davidson, you name it, how we were going to have the biggest and best record company this country's ever seen, and we were going to pull no punches. We were going out there, we're going to publicise the hell out of it, and through the auspices of Bill Armstrong Studios, they put together a fantastic audio-visual program, which we toured right around Australia and invited all the broadcasters in to listen to. So when I'm in the middle of this phone call with Cess Barlow, I said to him, he said, we'd like you to join us. Now, there were two things that went against that with me. One was there was no talk of any compensation. And the other thing was I said, look, I can't do it and I won't do it. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to let the radio station play the product as much as they like for no fee.
Good on you, Ronnie. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I want you to tell us the upshot of that actually happening, the record ban, because in actual fact it went in your favour.
Yes, it did.
And we're going to also bring out, I think, one of Australia's most distinguished engineers, Mr. Ernie Rose. So we'll be back in a minute.
Wrokdown.
Welcome back to Wrokdown. My special guest this evening is Ron Tudor, MBE.
MBE.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
When did you receive that? That was
1979.
for services to the Australian music industry, of course.
Exactly.
And speaking of services to the industry, you can't do all of the jobs all at once. And of course, without a fabulous crew of people around you, which you all did back in those days when you were talking about Fable, you started up Fable Records. We had this whole new generation of young engineers, enthusiastic engineers, that had all seemed to...
And we couldn't have done it without them.
You couldn't have done it without them. So I'd like to welcome out tonight to join us one of Australia's most distinguished engineers and producers, and one of the loveliest guys I think I've ever met. Would you please welcome Ernie Rose?
Ernie.
How you going, mate?
I think you two know each other.
Oh, yeah.
Indeed. If we don't now, there's something wrong.
He's like my brother.
He's like your brother.
Yeah.
Ern, obviously you started working with the boys, with Ron and at Armstrong's at a young age, but I believe that you grew up going to school with, was it Normie?
Normie Rowe was a Northcote High School boy, as I was.
So he was obviously into music at a very young age.
When we were, I guess, second or third form at high school, he was singing at the Preston Town Hall.
Already?
With Chess and all that crowd, you know. Yeah.
And were you involved in music at all? Were you playing in bands or...?
No, I was absolutely in awe of Norm and, you know, that whole scene. I guess that helped drive me towards getting involved in it.
So, did you have an interest in engineering, or was it actually the love of music that sort of sent you off into a direction of you've got to find something to do with this group of people?
But at that age, I was going to be the next Buddy Holly.
Oh.
I mean, that was, you know, I wanted to be a singer. And
Okay.
I spent all my time singing with Buddy Holly records with a, you know, one of my mum's vases. It looked a bit like a microphone, and you know, but and then I played in bands. But
I remember all that.
we
Do you remember? You say you remember all that?
well, we did a couple of demos at.
Only because I knocked his band back.
We did a couple of demos in the early days at Bill Studios, but I did some demos at Channel 9 with Colin Stevenson, who's
Yes,
one of the very renowned television sound engineers. And I remember standing in the control room listening to it back, and the drummer in the band said, "We sound just like the Beatles." And I mean,
Did they?
No.
and I, you know, so buoyed by that, I knocked on Ron's door. I think was it Astor Records then or W&G?
Astor.
It was Astor, yeah. And I remember knocking on a door that was a divided door like a horse barn.
Yeah,
and
it
you
was,
only
yeah.
opened the top half of it to talk to. But anyway,
The VIP's got the whole door and you only got up.
and there was Ronnie in a grey dust coat, and I gave him this tape and said, "Would you please listen to it? You know, we want to make a record." And so he said, "Okay, come back and see me next Thursday." And I come back next Thursday, and he came back to me and said, "Thanks, it was lovely, but no thanks." You know, so
Were you shattered?
Oh,
of course?
absolutely, yeah.
So then how did you find your way into the recording side of things?
As these processes went on, I become fascinated with the other side of the glass, and I, you know, while I was, you know, then listening to my favourite records, I was become more interested in how they were made and, you know, the process of making them. So I then, with a bit of cunning, got an opportunity to get an interview with Bill Armstrong, and after quite a persistent time, I think I rang him up. I rang Bill every second day for about 3.5 months, and every day I called him, he was just that little bit more embarrassed that I'd, you know, he had to say, "Look, we really haven't got anything, but, you know, give me a call in a few days." And
So it was sheer persistence.
it was sheer
actually.
persistence, and eventually he said, "Oh, look, I haven't got anything, but
I'm sick of you.
come in." He said, "Come in tomorrow and we'll have another chat." So I came in again, and he said, "Look, I've got nothing, but there's a bit of wiring work. You know, can you solder?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I can." Well, I didn't really know how, but I learned it pretty quick. So he gave me a little job wiring up some patch panels between, you know, the various terrace houses that they had at that stage.
This was in South Melbourne.
in Bank Street, yeah.
And so who were the big engineers there at the moment? Because obviously, you know, you must have had your eye on that eventually. So who were you sort of really checking out?
Roger Savage was
Rog.
was iconic. I mean, you know, I think anyone in the music industry at that time knew Roger had made it happen. You know, I mean, it was just he'd walked in and there became a sound. There was Alan Pay, who was he was recording The Strangers, I think, at that stage, and John Sayers, who probably the start of a creative generation of engineers. I think, you know, John would try anything. You know,
He was
you know,
good,
it wouldn't matter what, you know, he'd just try every microphone in front of every instrument until he heard what he liked. And
So basically, really, Melbourne had become the hotspot to record. You know, from the late 60s on, Melbourne was the place to be. Armstrong's was the place to record. Let's get back to the radio ban, because we sort of cut off, but that was a very, very important time in Australian music, because it actually changed the course of a lot of people's careers, didn't it?
It really did. I mean, it was a devastating time in some respects. And the interesting point about it is that Fable had signed the biggest royalty rate lease deal with Polygram worldwide that had ever been negotiated in this country. It was a massive result for us. And because because Polygram did not own a pressing plant, all of their product was pressed by EMI. And EMI became very dirty on me over the fact that I wouldn't join them in the record ban. So they announced to Polygram that they would not press any Fable product.